In the summer of 1944, on a tiny Pacific island called Tinian, the ground itself seemed to burn, not from bombs falling from the sky, but from fire rolling forward on steel tracks. Inside fortified caves and bunkers, thousands of Japanese soldiers believed they were safe. They were wrong. What came for them was not a bullet, not artillery, but liquid fire. A weapon so terrifying that survivors described the air screaming, the earth melting, and escape becoming impossible. This is the declassified truth of the flame tanks on Tinian, and how modern warfare crossed a line it could never uncross. Before we begin, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you are watching from. Your support helps bring hidden history like this to light. By mid-1944, the Pacific War had entered a brutal new phase. The United States was no longer fighting just to survive. It was fighting to finish the war. And standing directly in the path to Japan itself was a small island most people had never heard of: Tinian. Tinian was part of the Mariana Islands, just north of Guam. On a map, it looked insignificant. But to American planners, it was priceless. If captured, Tinian could host massive airfields, long enough for the new B-29 Superfortress bombers to reach the Japanese mainland. From Tinian, Japan would no longer be distant. It would be vulnerable. The Japanese knew this too. For years, they had transformed Tinian into a fortress. Instead of relying on beach defenses, they dug inward, constructing hundreds of interconnected caves, tunnels, pillboxes, and underground bunkers carved directly into volcanic rock. These weren't primitive hideouts. They were engineered kill zones, designed to let defenders survive bombardment, then emerge to fight at close range. Earlier island battles, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, had already shown the Americans a horrifying pattern. You could bomb an island for days. You could shell it until nothing seemed left standing. And still, when infantry landed, the enemy would rise from the ground itself. Machine guns from invisible openings, mortars firing from caves no bomb could reach, snipers who vanished underground before retaliation arrived. Tinian was expected to be worse. The invasion began on July 24, 1944. U.S. Marines landed on narrow beaches under heavy fire. Within hours, it became clear that traditional tactics were failing again. Every bunker cleared cost lives. Every cave assaulted became a death trap. Dark, cramped, and filled with defenders willing to die. Grenades could not reach deep enough. Flamethrowers carried by infantry were effective, but dangerously short-ranged. Operators had to approach within meters of firing ports, making them prime targets. Commanders needed something different, something protected, something that could bring fire directly to the enemy without exposing a single Marine. That's when the flame tanks rolled in. These were modified M4 Sherman tanks, stripped of their standard main guns and equipped instead with high-pressure flamethrower systems. Inside the armored hull were thickened fuel mixtures, early versions of what would later be refined into napalm. When released, the flame didn't simply burn. It clung. The range shocked even seasoned officers. Some flame tanks could project fire over 100 yards, blasting directly into cave mouths, bunker slits, and tunnel entrances. The flames consumed oxygen, superheated enclosed spaces, and left nowhere to run. For Japanese defenders underground, the experience was unimaginable. The fire didn't need to touch you to kill you. The heat alone could suffocate. The smoke could blind. And once ignited, caves became ovens. On Tinian, Marines began using flame tanks systematically. First, infantry would locate a cave complex. Then tanks would advance, shielded by riflemen. A short burst of flame, sometimes only seconds long, would be enough to neutralize entire positions. From a tactical standpoint, it worked. Casualties among U.S. troops dropped sharply. Advances that once took days now took hours. Entire defensive lines collapsed when fire replaced explosives. But efficiency came at a terrible human cost. Many Japanese soldiers never fired another shot. Some never even saw their attackers. The war, for them, ended in darkness, heat, and silence. By early August, organized resistance on Tinian was effectively broken. The island fell, and almost immediately, construction crews arrived. Within months, Tinian hosted the largest airfield complex in the world. From these runways, B-29 bombers would take off toward Japan, including the aircraft that carried atomic weapons. The flame tanks had helped secure a stepping stone, one that would change history forever. But long after the fighting ended, a question lingered. Was this weapon a grim necessity, or a warning of how far modern war was willing to go? For the Japanese soldiers trapped beneath Tinian, the war was no longer fought in open air. It was fought underground. The caves were supposed to be protection. Carved deep into volcanic rock, they had survived naval bombardment, aerial bombing, and artillery fire. When explosions shook the island above, the men inside waited, counting seconds, listening for silence, believing survival meant endurance. But flame tanks changed everything. Unlike shells or bullets, fire didn't bounce off stone, it flowed into it. When a flame tank approached a cave entrance, there was often no warning. No explosion, no impact. Just a sudden roar, like a living creature inhaling, followed by unbearable heat. The first thing to disappear was oxygen. Witness accounts collected after the war describe men collapsing without visible burns. Their lungs seized, breathing became impossible. In confined spaces, the firestorm consumed air faster than the human body could react. Darkness followed. Smoke, thick, choking, and blinding, rolled through tunnels, curling into side chambers where wounded soldiers lay. Those deeper inside the caves felt the heat surge through the rock itself. The walls became hot to the touch. Weapons grew too hot to hold. There was nowhere to run. Japanese doctrine on Tinian emphasized fighting to the last. But the flame tanks removed choice entirely. Charging out meant instant gunfire. Staying inside meant suffocation. Some tried to dig deeper, scraping rock with bare hands. Others pressed their faces into the earth, hoping for cooler air that never came. The psychological impact was devastating. Survivors later said the sound haunted them more than the flames. A mechanical hiss, then a thunderous rush. Not like fire from wood or oil, but something unnatural. Thicker, heavier, unstoppable. American Marines witnessed this from the outside. Many had seen combat before. They had stormed beaches, cleared bunkers, and lost friends. But watching flame tanks operate left a mark even on veterans. Some Marines described the silence afterward as the worst part. No return fire, no movement. Just smoke pouring from openings that moments earlier had been deadly firing positions. Officers noted the effectiveness in after-action reports. Entire cave systems neutralized in minutes. Minimal friendly casualties. Mission objectives achieved. Yet personal letters told a different story. Some soldiers wrote home saying the weapon worked, but they wished they had never seen it used. Others admitted they stopped thinking about what happened inside the caves, because thinking made it harder to keep moving forward. For Japanese civilians hiding alongside soldiers, the horror was magnified. By 1944, Tinian still had a civilian population, many forced to assist the military. Some families sheltered in caves, believing the underground was safer than the battlefield above. When flame tanks were used, distinctions disappeared. Fire did not recognize uniforms. After the battle, American troops discovered charred personal items, canteens, handwritten notes, fragments of clothing, frozen in place where people had been moments before. Official casualty figures struggled to reflect what actually happened underground. Many bodies were never recovered. Some caves were sealed permanently, entombing those inside. The weapon that had saved lives on one side erased them silently on the other. And this raised an uncomfortable question, one that commanders, historians, and nations would debate for decades. Was this simply war, or had the nature of combat changed forever? Flame weapons blurred the line between battlefield necessity and total annihilation. They were not designed for precision. They were designed for denial, to remove the enemy's ability to exist in a space. After Tinian, flame tanks would appear again, on Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and beyond. Each time, they proved effective. Each time, the moral weight grew heavier. By the end of the war, the world would witness weapons even more destructive. But the lessons of Tinian were already clear. Once warfare turns the environment itself into a weapon, air, stone, fire, there are no safe places left. And for those who survived the caves of Tinian, survival itself became a burden. Because remembering meant reliving a moment when the earth burned from the inside out. By the time the battle for Tinian entered its decisive phase, American commanders faced a brutal reality. Traditional warfare methods were failing against an enemy that had mastered underground defense. Every cave became a fortress. Every bunker demanded lives. The question was no longer how to win, but how many would die before victory came. High-ranking officers studying reports from Saipan and Peleliu saw the same pattern repeat. Naval bombardment destroyed surface targets, but left underground networks untouched. Infantry assaults, no matter how disciplined, resulted in heavy casualties when approaching concealed firing ports. Tinian could not become another prolonged battle. The island was needed quickly. Every week of delay pushed back the bombing campaign against Japan. Every delay, commanders believed, meant more lives lost across the Pacific. So the decision was made to escalate, not in numbers, but in method. Flame tanks were authorized as a tactical solution, not as terror weapons. Official documents described them in clinical terms: cave neutralization, area denial, reduction of fortified positions. These words stripped emotion from reality. From a command perspective, the logic was simple. A tank could approach a bunker that would kill an infantryman. Fire could reach places explosives could not. A few seconds of flame could replace hours of dangerous combat. Reports from the field showed immediate results. Marine units supported by flame tanks advanced faster and with fewer casualties. Positions that once required repeated assaults were cleared in a single coordinated action. Medical officers recorded a drop in severe injuries among assault units. To commanders responsible for thousands of men, the numbers mattered. Yet even as success mounted, unease spread quietly through the ranks. Some officers questioned whether the weapon crossed an unseen boundary. Unlike bullets or shells, flame did not distinguish surrender from resistance. If a defender could not escape a cave, there was no opportunity to give up. But in the context of 1944, surrender itself was rare. Japanese doctrine emphasized endurance to death. Previous battles had shown that apparent surrender could mask ambushes. Trust had eroded on both sides. This reality hardened decision-making. Commanders argued that flame tanks ended resistance decisively, preventing prolonged suffering for both sides. The faster the island fell, the fewer civilians would be caught in continued fighting. The fewer Marines would die clearing one cave at a time. Tinian fell in just over a week. From a purely military standpoint, it was a success, one of the fastest major island captures in the Pacific. Minimal American casualties compared to expectations, a strategic objective secured. But the consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. Within weeks, engineers transformed Tinian into a massive airbase. Runways stretched across land that had recently burned. Hangars rose where caves had once hidden defenders. From this island, history accelerated. B-29 bombers began launching missions over Japan, initially conventional bombing raids. Then, in August 1945, 2 aircraft took off from Tinian carrying weapons unlike any used before. The flame tanks had cleared the ground. The airfields had enabled the sky. Some historians argue that Tinian represents a turning point, not because of what happened there, but because of what followed. It was a place where the logic of efficiency overcame restraint, where reducing casualties on one side justified extreme methods against the other. After the war, flame weapons became controversial. International discussions questioned their use. Some nations restricted them. Others quietly kept them in arsenals. acknowledging their effectiveness while avoiding public attention. Veterans who had operated flame tanks rarely spoke about it. Those who did often framed their memories carefully, not as stories of destruction, but of survival. They had followed orders. They had protected their units. They had ended battles, and yet silence often followed their words. Because even justified actions can leave shadows. Tinian's legacy is not just military, it is ethical. It forces a question that modern warfare still struggles to answer. Is a weapon acceptable if it shortens war, even when it makes survival impossible for those on the receiving end? The commanders of 1944 believed they were choosing the lesser evil. History continues to debate whether such a thing truly exists. And as technology advances, the lesson of Tinian remains painfully relevant. When war turns the environment itself into a weapon, the line between victory and devastation becomes dangerously thin. When the guns finally fell silent on Tinian, the island did not celebrate victory. There were no parades, no cheers, only smoke-stained rock, abandoned tunnels, and a quiet that felt heavier than the fighting. For American forces, attention moved forward quickly. Runways were poured, hangars assembled. The war demanded momentum. But for those who had lived through the caves on both sides, Tinian never truly ended. Japanese survivors, few in number, carried memories they rarely shared. Many returned to a homeland already devastated by bombing. There was little space to speak about underground battles that had no witnesses and no graves. Some refused to describe what happened at all. Others spoke only in fragments. Heat without flame, air that vanished, darkness that pressed inward. They did not frame their stories as accusations. They framed them as warnings. American veterans, too, struggled with memory. Flame tank operators were often isolated after the war. Their role was necessary, but uncomfortable. They had not faced the enemy face to face. They had delivered destruction remotely, through machinery and pressure valves. Many veterans emphasized the lives they believed they saved. Their own, and those of the Marines who would have died clearing caves by hand. And they were not wrong. Military historians acknowledge that without flame tanks, casualty numbers on Tinian would have been far higher. The weapon shortened battles. It prevented repeated assaults. It reduced prolonged suffering in open combat. Yet history is rarely satisfied with numbers alone. As decades passed, flame warfare became a subject of ethical debate. International law evolved. Weapons that caused indiscriminate suffering came under scrutiny. While flamethrowers were never fully banned, their use declined. Modern militaries grew wary of their psychological and humanitarian consequences. Some quietly retired flame systems altogether. Tinian became a case study taught in war colleges, not just as a tactical success, but as a moral crossroads. It forced future commanders to ask difficult questions before authorizing extreme measures. Does effectiveness justify inevitability? Does saving one group excuse erasing another? And once a line is crossed, can it ever be uncrossed? Today, Tinian is peaceful. Grass covers former airstrips. Tourists walk paths unaware of what lies beneath. Some caves remain sealed, left untouched out of respect, or perhaps uncertainty. The island stands as a reminder that history is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers from underground. The flame tanks of Tinian were not the most destructive weapons of the war, but they were among the most revealing. They showed how quickly necessity can reshape morality, how technology can distance humans from consequences, and how war, once pushed far enough, stops asking permission. Tinian also reminds us that history is not about assigning simple blame. It is about understanding choices made under unbearable pressure and learning from them before repeating them. Because every generation believes its wars are different, more justified, more controlled, and every generation is wrong. The declassified truth of Tinian is not just about fire. It is about where war leads when survival becomes the only measure that matters, and whether remembering can keep us from walking that path again. If this documentary made you think, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. History survives only when we choose to remember it.